What happens when a Dungeons & Dragons player wants to steal a group from his DM? Let's find out, shall we? To the story. The Coup by Reddit user Peter E. Venturer. So this story is a major event in my DM career that traumatized me for a long time after, and almost made me quit D&D entirely. However, now that I'm in a better place in my life, with a much better group of friends, I decided to post it here for your enjoyment. The cast of characters isn't super important, beyond the one evil genius that I will call Bob. It all started in college, in a creative writing class. I didn't have a ton of friends at the time, so I began to grow attached to this group of writers in my creative writing class. We would talk about writing, fiction, and just life in general for literal hours after the class had ended, and once even had to get kicked out of the classroom so the next class could start their lesson and use the room. One day, someone floated the idea of wanting to play D&D, and I mentioned that I was a longtime DM looking for a group for a horror campaign I had been writing. So we immediately got together for a session, and it was instant magic. The characters created all had great concepts, the role-playing was great, and everyone really enjoyed the story I had written. It was around this time that I began to have a really good friendship with the infamous Bob. He had always had great insights into my writing, so I often asked him for advice regarding my campaign ideas. As this went on, I began to put a lot of trust in him, which he would soon come to abuse. On a particular busy day, when I was supposed to have a session, I realized I would have had to cancel, but everyone was clamoring to have another session. So I called Bob up and suggested that he try his hand at DMing tonight. This was my first mistake, for as time went on and I resumed my DMing duties, and the campaign continued to the 1-year mark, everything seemed to be going really well, when one day I was talking to some members of the group and found out Bob had run some sessions beyond the initial one-shot without me. I was a little confused and asked Bob why he had excluded me. He told me that he thought I was going to be busy that entire week and that the plans were already made, so he didn't bother asking. I brushed this off, thinking that this was a simple misunderstanding. Then, the week of finals hit, and everything went wrong. I was leaving my creative writing class to head over to my English final when Bob told me that he needed to talk to me. He pulled me aside and told me, "So, I have talked with the group, and we have unanimously decided to move on to a different campaign without you. And they asked that I talk to you because they don't want to talk to you about it." I was floored. This had been my only friend group for most of college, and they were abandoning me. I mumbled some apology, went to my final, and was so upset about everything that I fully failed the final. When I got home, I couldn't get any of it through my skull. I must have done something to offend them, said something or done something, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what I could have done. I felt so unbearably guilty, but I didn't even know what I had done to deserve any of it. So I decided that I needed to talk to the group, apologize, and then leave them like they wanted. On the group chat, I apologized profusely, told them that I respected their decision, and wished everyone the best. Then, the first message came. "What are you talking about? We never said anything about kicking you from the group." Then, the rest of the group entered the chat, all stating the same confused sentiment. No one knew they had unanimously decided to kick me from the group and start a new campaign. Everyone except Bob. Absolutely furious, I tried to confront him online, but he denied any involvement, saying he must have been confused, or that maybe the other players were intimidated by me. I then went and talked to each of my players, and everyone had the same story. Bob had been having sessions without me, and he had never mentioned any of this to anyone. At this point, the semester was over, and the group never really got over this. We were all weirded out by this incident, and people generally stopped talking to each other. The passion to play my campaign went out as well, as none of us could really get past what had happened. A while later, I ran into one of my old friends, and she confirmed that Bob's campaign he had wanted to run never manifested, as everyone pretty much blamed him for everything and thought he was a jerk for doing what he did. So that was some solace, at least. It took me a long while to get over this incident and start trusting people again. But after a bunch of therapy sessions and tentatively running a few one-shots, I started playing D&D again and am a proud DM to this day. I have an awesome group who supports me and is very open about any issues that they have, and it has done wonders to build back my self-confidence as a DM and just a person. So I guess the lesson is, if the world seems like it's turned against you, maybe double check to make sure it isn't one guy trying to do something sneaky. Wow, talk about a scumbag. Not only did Bob try to steal away OP's group of players, but also made OP fail his final for his English class, which OP later stated in the comments that they had to retake the entire class. Maybe Bob just liked DMing so much that he decided that he wanted the power of being the DM, and instead of talking to OP about maybe switching roles from time to time, or running 2 separate campaigns, he thought it best to lie and tell OP that the group didn't want him anymore, which is really stupid. Bob should have known that eventually OP would talk to the others in the group and find out what happened. And as far as Bob running the other games behind OP's back with the other players, I will admit that I was confused about how that game never came up as a topic during OP's games. And OP clarified in the comments that Bob had only run a few sessions at that point, and that it did come up in conversation, but OP just assumed that they were talking about the one-shot that Bob had run for them. It really sucks that this event broke up the group entirely. I'm of the thinking that they should have continued OP's campaign, but just kicked Bob out. But at least it sounds like OP has regained their footing and is now a DM for a great group. So at least there's a happy ending here. And you know what else makes me happy? When you like the video, subscribe, and click the bell. Kitties also make me happy as well. Simba's such a good kitty. But now, let's find out what happens when a dungeon master is way too obsessed with his character from an old D&D campaign. To the story. D&D DM runs a campaign that is basically a book with his DMPC as the protagonist. By Reddit user LexiP29. Many exhilarating stories to tell of this atrocious campaign, but I'll begin with the episode that stuck with me the most. When I was in high school, I joined a D&D group of other high school kids, and this kid among us was the current DM. Before this campaign, they played another one, their first one, that was run by a more experienced, older player. The first thing I noticed in the campaign was that the DM had an unhealthy obsession with NPCs, to the point where he would have conversations with himself for like 10 minutes straight. Specifically with one NPC, a certain paladin, who I then discovered was the DM's character in the previous campaign they played in. The campaign as a whole sucked massive Goliath balls, so I didn't really care about the story, which was just as terrible as everything else, or whatever. And I just kept playing for the combat, which was kind of fun with my blaster caster wizard. The issues began when he realized that the players probably didn't care just how quote-unquote cool his megalomaniac, Mary Sue, Mega OP Paladin original character was. so he decided to have him as a DMPC for a while. Those were probably the worst D&D sessions I've ever played in. In one of them, we went to the Underdark to fight some white dragon, and we were all somewhat hyped for the combat, which I could tell that the other players also thought was the only acceptable part of the campaign. The effing DMPC paladin followed us, however, and then it was revealed that the dragon was important to the paladin's backstory and killed his brother or whatever. Without even looking up from my character sheet, I could tell that all the other players were already rolling their eyes like cartoon characters. We got to the dragon, rolled initiative, and not even half of the players had the chance to act in the first round, as the paladin pulled out one of his super BS OP moves and one-shotted the dragon. I bet the DM felt like it was the coolest crap ever while describing that, but the reactions he received were, justifiably, looks of boredom and disappointment. The rest of the campaign was a mess, and I truly believe now that what it needed was a murder hobo player that would have tried to kill the paladin dude. Either we got rid of the guy, or, more than likely, it would have ended in a TPK, and the campaign would have ended. Either way, it would be a win-win. Yeah, it sounds like the DM wanted to make the game all about himself, and used that DMPC to do so. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not totally against DMPCs, as they can be used to good effect if you have a smaller party, or if they just join for a little while. But some DMs will use them as a way to put themselves into the game and basically put the spotlight on their character, while treating the other players' characters more like background characters, which is exactly what this DM did. Honestly, the moment he had his DMPC one-shot a dragon, that would have been the point that I would have left that game. Though, at least it sounds like this didn't turn OP away from D&D, and they have likely had better games after this. Now, with our final story, we find out how a dungeon master figured out that their player was a dice cheat. To the story. You Can't Miss If You Don't Roll, by Reddit user Dungeon Scrawler. I was running a D&D game for my partner's younger brother, half our age and still a teenager, and his friends. Only one of the kids had played before, one of those snarky, smart, and angsty kids who would have lived and died on Tumblr if she'd grown up a decade earlier. She played exactly one character archetype, the too smart for you blaster caster, and she played it well, maybe too well. Soon after she joined, the campaign went online. I hadn't paid too much attention to her rolls, except that she seemed luckier than most, but that pattern quickly spiraled. She almost never missed an attack roll or failed to save. Her charisma scores were never great, but she dominated every social interaction. I usually have a lot of trust in my players, so I was letting them roll dice at home and just reporting the end result. I was obliviously suspicious, and on one occasion, wrote down the results of 40+ different checks, attacks, and saves. In combat, her average roll on the die was a 17. Out of combat, it was a 15. She rolled below a 10 once, and it was a 9. This was a pretty normal night for her. After that, I made everyone use Discord's dice roller, and she complained without fail every time she failed a roll. After COVID, I ran a few in-person sessions of Monster of the Week. Everyone rolled on the table, except for Blastercaster, now playing a spooky, who rolled inside her tiny dice case and reported the results to us. And you guessed it, almost every roll was a 10+, a full success. She threatened to walk home if I made her roll on the table. I was in shock. She had to know I knew, that I had known for a while, but her projected fantasy of a brilliant, sassy, magical genius who was never wrong forced her to look me in the eye and tell me that she rolled her 8th 12 of the night on 2d6. That was the end of her at my table, but my partner's brother kept running games with her. It's been a couple of years now, and while she's been confronted on her cheating and has toned down her fake rolls, she recently got caught adding, literally, 10 extra feats to her most recent Blaster Caster Wizard. Note, for those wondering why I did not confront her myself, I talked to my partner's brother about it, and he said he didn't want to lose her as a friend, and he was worried that she would take it out on him if I said anything. I will never understand why people cheat at a tabletop RPG like D&D. The failures can actually make the game more fun, and will oftentimes lead to great, unintended moments of roleplay. And to cheat so blatantly too. She had to know that people suspected her, especially after she refused to roll on the table at the in-person game like everyone else. Though I can understand OP not confronting her about it, as OP was running the game for their little brother in the first place, and for the sake of her brother's concern, it was probably best to just let it go. But if she keeps it up, she will eventually run into a DM that won't put up with that crap. But that is all I have for you today. I realize that today's video was a bit shorter than my normal videos, but I have had one heck of a week. But as always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.